This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss Penn State's win over West Virginia, look at some of the future opponents the Nittany Lions face this year, and preview Saturday's game against Bowling Green. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State beat writer at the Center Daily Times. She's Audrey Snyder of The Athletic. And Audrey, we are in a bit of a lull now, right? Penn State beats West Virginia, and now it's probably 4-0, right? Until USC, probably.
Oh, John, you have to go 1-0 each week. Penn State's not overlooking Bowling Green, but you and I definitely are. I mean, we can have that conversation for sure. Yeah,
and so are the sports books apparently based on the
well,
spread out there.
I don't look at, and people who listen to this, you will find out I am not a gambler. Which, as we found out when John and I did that preseason game, and I was just setting things that he said were ridiculous. No, I'm not a gambler, but I can tell you that this will not be the most scintillating football game you will see this season. And if Saturday is the most scintillating game or Penn State game you see this season, then the Nittany Lions have a massive problem.
Yes.
I don't expect that to be the case. I think the hype around this one for me, John, it's, hey, this is kind of the first look at some of these stadium renovations this weekend. You get the home opener, you get the crowd back in town. Football's here, but yeah, the on-field product, number 8 Penn State should roll on Saturday.
Yeah, and we will get to a lot of that later. Mm-hmm. First, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. If you're watching, hit that subscribe button down below. We have hit 1,000 followers, and we deeply appreciate that. And hit that thumbs up button below down below the video as well as I stumble through that. You can tell us.
Well, now we just lost subscribers because John
and they're gone. But no, now we continue the march to 2,000. Right,
like
this is never ending for us. We are appreciative of everyone who subscribes. We're appreciative of all the comments and everything. So keep that up. We look forward to doing this every week after every game. It's a lot of fun for us. But yeah, this is Saturday. We'll get to it, but this is still a little bit of the West Virginia leftover pod, right? Like there's still some stuff I think that is worth discussing. We talked about snap counts and what we thought they would be heading into the midweek, and here we are, and we were right. Harrison Wallace leads the team in snaps at wide receiver. Tied for second though, Audrey. Who was that?
Well, no, actually, John, he was tied per True Media with Harrison Wallace for the lead at 35 snaps.
Although
sometimes
because
if you use PFF or another service,
I've seen it elsewhere that it was not tied, I believe, and I think it was 36 elsewhere.
So this is always the challenge for those of you listening to this. So these services that we rely on, they do a great job for the most part, but you're basically delegating to an army of freelancers. So and this is tough, right? Because I've tried doing it before, tracking snaps during a game, and I can't write a running takeaways piece and do that. Like, it's just, you cannot.
I was going to say, this would be something that I think both of us would love to do. It is just impossible, right? When we are doing if we were just focusing on this, I think we could do it, but otherwise it is impossible.
No, and these services, to be clear, the one that I use, True Media, they do a great job. They have a lot of advanced data.
Yes.
But when we say snap counts, we're talking offense and defense, right? So if a guy plays on special teams, that's not going to get tracked. And this is why John and I have talked about this on here before. It was so wonderful for me, and I know fans hate this, but when they had names on the back of the jerseys, right? Because it's like, oh, hey, you have 2 number 7s. Who is who? And this guy's on special teams, and we're up high in the sky in the press box. But to the point, John, back to the original point that I just talked around. Julian Fleming, right, was not targeted, therefore did not have a catch. But he played, per True Media, the same number of offensive snaps, 35, which was tied with Trey Wallace for the lead among the receivers, right? So for everybody who was saying, where was Julian Fleming? Why didn't they use Julian Fleming? We're worried about Julian Fleming. He was out there. He was just blocking a lot, which is going to be a significant part of his role. Now, he didn't come here just to block. We know that.
He was out there running routes too.
He was. And James Franklin had mentioned this week on Tuesday that there's going to be an effort to get Julian Fleming involved earlier in the game, right? So they're well aware. They've heard the fan panic, but I think it's one of those when you go back and look at the snap counts, it's not that big of a deal. In fact, he actually played more snaps than Liam Clifford. Amari Evans was credited with 31 snaps, which was third most among receivers, while Liam Clifford, I almost called him Sean, while Liam Clifford logged 21 snaps. Tyler Johnson was also in there for 5 snaps. And then you and I had mentioned on the postgame pod that Kaden Saunders did not take any snaps with the offense, but was back as the punt returner. And James Franklin mentioned this week that I don't know if you and I we didn't discuss this, if we took this the same way.
I think we talked about it on here because he confirmed my suspicions at the time because I asked that question about Kaden, like, was this, related? Essentially, they saw on the tape that West Virginia was likely to sky punt quite a bit, and so he would only have to go out and fair catch. So they sent him out there because they trust him to make those catches on punts, and that's why he didn't play on offense. And they hope to, have him back as well this week. For what it's worth, that also applies to Khalil Dinkins. James Franklin said last night after practice that while Dinkins is he was back in practicing when we saw him there, it still takes some time to ramp up and get yourself involved and on a full workload. So, and this is part of the quirks of the schedule for Penn State and some of the perks of it too. Like, they don't have to rush Dinkins back. They don't have to rush Kaden Saunders back. They can kind of play these guys, ramp them up, and then have them ready for October 5th if you're really that worried about a UCLA team that almost lost to Hawaii, or more realistically, October 12th when Penn State heads to USC. So this is there's about a month here where anyone who's banged up, this applies to Saunders, Dinkins, and everyone else, where guys don't have to be full go and you don't have to kind of push them to make sure that they're ready to go for game day.
John, you just said something that I think is going to be a weekly segment somehow on here on the Nittany Dispatch. Quirks and perks. Somehow we're going to have to work this in. I like that.
I did not mean to rhyme.
I'm a sucker for a pun and a good rhyme. But I mean, I think so much of, and this is why it's always a bleed over conversation this week, is because all the things that we didn't see from this offense in the preseason, all the questions we had, right? You get one game, you get a competitive opponent. You're going to learn more about this team against West Virginia than you're going to this Saturday, right? And so, yes, it's one performance, it's one win, but the snap distribution matters a lot. And the point about Saunders also kind of makes me wonder with Liam Clifford, who had been banged up this preseason.
Yes.
Do you think his limitation was health related perhaps, or is it just a byproduct of there are other guys they want to get involved? I don't know. Curious.
I would venture to guess that it was partially health related, but I would also venture to guess that grouping at the top is much more a Trey Wallace and the next 3 than it is Trey Wallace and Liam Clifford in the next 2, right? And Julian Fleming and Amari Evans being the other 2, and Kaden Saunders, frankly, called a next 4 or next 3 after Trey Wallace. But I think Liam Clifford's absence was at least a little bit injury related. Franklin mentioned too at the Tuesday, used to calling it a Tuesday press conference.
Oh, I've done the same. Yeah.
I've caught myself on this several times already this year, which is a story for another day. But he mentioned that he would essentially be careful about saying that X will be the case because there was a certain amount of playing time distributed on Saturday. Attributed that to bumps and bruises too. I believe he was talking about Clifford. I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure there are other guys he's talking about. I believe he was talking about Clifford and maybe Fleming there too. But I still think it's pretty clear that they view Fleming as someone that can really help them out. He showed that in the running game. He's getting open, by the way. Like the thing that Penn State struggled with so much last year, he's getting open. He just wasn't, it wasn't his spot in the progression. Essentially, when Allar made his reads, there wasn't necessarily a lot drawn up for Fleming. But yeah, I still think he's going to be an impactful player this year. But I do think that we're going to see a lot of Trey Wallace all season long, and then we're going to see Fleming, Clifford, Evans, and Saunders step up for different reasons. I will say, I do think Fleming will be the most consistent in that conversation because of what he brings from a blocking standpoint, from what he brings from a reliability standpoint.
Yeah, and I think the James Franklin comment about, guys who started last week aren't going to start this week, right? So much of when he talks to us in these press settings, It's also that he's talking to the locker room and he's talking to
Yes.
parents, right? And to me,
And maybe he's talking to the running backs.
Well, that's where we'll go next. But like there's a conversation that's happening in the room, but it reverberates elsewhere. And right, like to me, that was, hey, we're playing Bowling Green this week. Like let's cut through the BS. We know it is what it is. Just because you started last week, you need to go out and earn it on the practice field this week, right? He mentioned that with the cornerbacks as well. But John, let's get into the running backs since you had such a good transition there for us. Nick Singleton was the starter last week. We've seen the rotation. I asked James Franklin this week how he kind of would assess KRON Allen's performance in that opener at West Virginia. Again, not a big stat day for KRON Allen, and it was for Nick Singleton. And James said, hey, there's basically paraphrasing. There's going to be weeks where KRON has the opportunities where, perhaps guys block a little bit better when he has the ball, those types of things, right? He's trying to downplay it. I get it. Still, the human element of this to me, it's a lot to try and keep two guys happy. And I know they're friends, and I know it's the whole we're going to get everybody the ball, but I still think there's a lot of pressure. If you're KRON Allen, there's pressure to perform. If you're Nick Singleton, there's pressure to perform. And maybe you start to press a little bit in those moments, right? Like I think just like we saw last year, and we were always on the lookout for negative body language, that's going to be continuing this year just because it's such a unique dynamic. And yes, the whole point is to limit the wear and tear on both of these guys to get them to the next level, to get them to that second contract in the NFL. That's always the goal, right? Like that's why they're bought into it, but that's a challenge. And I do think from like the humanistic level, it is hard, I believe.
Yeah. And I think it will be interesting to see how it plays out. I would venture to guess that KRON Allen maybe starts on Saturday, right? Like you want to show him that you have confidence in him as a running back, that just because the numbers don't, line up with Singleton's from the game against West Virginia, that doesn't mean that he's losing his role or anything like that, right? Like, I think there's always, I don't entirely disagree with James' assessment that like KRON was like lighting the world on. I don't think he was saying that, to be clear, but like I don't think the numbers necessarily are lying to you about KRON's performance on Saturday. I think he would tell you that it probably wasn't his best game. He missed two holds that I saw when rewatching the film that I thought he could have hit that would have helped the team out. That being said, there were a lot of occasions where there was pressure in the backfield that just wasn't there when Singleton was in the game, that they, kind of had to deal with. But James is right when he talks about the pass blocking, the pass catching. Like he is really important in those situations. I talked about that check release play out of the backfield on Saturday. Like that works because KRON is a savvy receiver, able to get open and then able to make plays after the catch. I think what we knew about Singleton and Allen remains true. They're both going to go in the 2025 NFL draft. If they choose to do so, they're both going to go.
You're going to get us in trouble right there, John.
I don't mean like actually leave. I mean like they're going to be drafted if they choose to leave, right? Like they're both draftable players. We'll see what round that ends up being in, but like whenever they go, that will end up.
There we go. There we go.
Yes, like
we don't need angry messages, John.
No, we also don't need people aggregating anything. But like, odds are you're a running back. Part of the reason you buy into this is because it limits your workload and gets you to the NFL quicker and healthier. Well, an extra year in college doesn't really help that cause. So I am guessing that we know how this ends. I'm not reporting anything, to be clear, but like it's pretty easy to read the tea leaves on this one, and how things go with running backs that are NFL caliber running backs. But yeah, I think both like that should be kept in mind too. Like these guys have futures. And I don't know that they are thinking about the NFL or anything like that, but they would have every right to if they are, right, and wanting to perform and wanting to put good film out there. Absolutely. We saw how many people from the NFL, NFL scouts and people in front offices were at that game on Saturday. Of course they want to perform in that spot. So if someone ends up being disappointed or whatever, I think that's totally normal. I think both are going to end up having excellent years still. But yeah, I think it is something to keep in mind that there is a level of emotional balancing, humanity balancing, I guess.
Yeah, or like there's pressure, right? Like if you want to show in your limited reps that you're the guy, like I think that is human nature to say, hey, Audrey, here's a really big assignment. Don't mess it up, right? Here's one big opportunity, right? You don't want to mess it up. And that, I think it's the same thing for them. And so I'm curious how that balance works. I know we've talked about it a million times, and we're going to keep talking about it this season because it is unique. And I think after this week, and I don't want to give too much away how I phrased this here, but I think this week is an interesting opportunity for us to learn more about Cam Wallace as the number 3 running
Yes.
back. I always think of these types of non-conference games with this one and Kent State in a couple weeks. This is where you're looking at the depth on your roster, right? Like this is where you want to kind of dig a little bit deeper. And Cam Wallace, we saw him as the number 3 back. Maybe we see Quinton Martin on Saturday. I wonder.
This is definitely going to be one of those opportunities that James talked about in the preseason. I think it might have been the week before West Virginia, about kind of allocating games to preserve red shirts and like maximize guys, and like running backs one of those spots because they have Quinton Martin, because they have Corey Smith. They can play each of those guys in 4 games if there's like opportunity to play a 4th running back, and it allows them both to get 4 games and allows them to have a 4th back in 8 games essentially. And so this feels like a good opportunity to do it. Quinton Martin could have that opportunity. Kent State, likely that's going to come too. I would be surprised if it didn't against Illinois. There will be other teams later this year too that Penn State can do that. So yeah, I think you're right. I think, frankly, this is a good chance to limit Allen and Singleton both, to preserve both of them, because you don't really need both of them. Get them each 8 carries and get them out of there. They don't necessarily have a ton to prove against an opponent like Bowling Green. I don't think it's going to sway anything in one direction or another. But yeah, I think that being said, they're still going to want to get both of them touches, make sure both know that they, are not just wanted, but like appreciated in everything of the program. Because like you mentioned, that James has to balance those things too. Yeah. I'm not saying they don't feel that way. To be clear, all this whole discussion, I'm not saying anyone is feeling any type of way.
John, sit down on the couch here. We're having a good therapy session about feelings. They sit down on my brand new couch that I got.
That's true. But I want to make that clear. Like, we're not saying anyone is feeling any type of way, but it is something that's always worth monitoring.
Don't tell me how to feel, John.
Yeah. Anyways, we can move on from this running back discussion.
I just want to mention this quick. I pulled it up to look at snap counts on my second screen.
Yes.
KRON Allen actually 30 snaps to Nick Singleton's 27, which is kind of.
But that's about the balance that I would expect.
That's the 50-50 balance, right? Like that is as close as you're going to get.
Let's take a brief break from this episode of Nittany Dispatch to tell you about our friends at Robach. Robach is an apparel brand that you and I have been wearing for a good bit now. Both of us, picked up on it a couple years ago, and it's honestly become a massive part of my wardrobe. As you can tell,
I think that's all John wears. To be clear,
it really is. The hat I'm wearing is a Robach hat. You can of course get your first 20% off your first order at Robach with code TND20. It's 20% off your first order of Robach with TND20 at Robach.com. But yeah, Audrey, their performance polo is a big part of my golf game, and I know you are a big fan of the hoodies as well.
Yeah, super, super lightweight, stretchable fabric, great for going outside activities. Also looks nice in professional settings. I've seen John wear many of these in the press boxes. I have too. Big fan of the quarter zip as well. I think you might have a couple quarter zips, John. You a quarter zip guy?
Not as many quarter zips. Okay. Too many polos. I think
too many polos,
especially because of golf. Yeah,
I want to get my hands on. They have a new vest now that I want to check out. I'm a big vest fan myself. But no, I love their quality of their products are great. I think I'm particular about what I wear in terms of like I lounge around the house a lot, right? Like there's that, but I also can look presentable when I'm outside and feel comfortable with Robach's gear.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing for me too, right? Like I spend a lot of time at home, so I spend a lot of time, lounging around like you said, so it's super comfortable. You mentioned it. I wear the joggers, I wear the shorts, I wear the hoodies, the performance hoodies, the performance joggers, performance shorts in the press box at work because it does look nice, right? Like they're really nice clothes, they're really comfortable. They're my favorite thing to wear at this point. And like we said, you can get 20% off your first order at Robach with code TND20 at Robach today.
We had a chance this week, John, to talk with, I'll say backup quarterback, but I don't know how we phrase this anymore. Special quarterback, chess piece.
Offensive weapon.
X Factor, Beau Pribula. Yeah, we're going to have to come up with a name, like a way to describe him. But
we can call him the Lion.
No, because then I already had Tommy Stevens tweeting at me before about that, and here the original Lion. So yeah, I don't know what they're maybe next time we talk to Andy, we'll ask if he's got like a good
I'm
gimmicky
not going to ask
fun
him that.
name.
I'm just
Oh,
gonna,
I will. We know I'm above nothing here, but
we do.
that we're well aware of. But talking with Pribula, who played 19 snaps, some of those, of course, with Drew Allar also on the field. We were asking him about his role and how he's embraced this role. And I asked him, I said, was there ever a conversation when Coach K, Andy Kotelnicki, got here, in which you had to, in which he told you, like, hey, you're definitely having a role this year? And Beau said no, that it never happened. They just kind of looked at what he did at Kansas and went from there and was like, okay, I've seen him use two quarterbacks before. Okay, like I'm sure I'm going to have some kind of role here, but let's see how it goes. Well, he does have a role, and you're going to see it every week. And James Franklin continues to double down on it. And this is a big part of the offense. So I want to see like what this looks like. Again, it's Bowling Green, so like we're going to keep seeing it. But the key is what they do with Beau Pribula. It's going to look differently each week, right? There's Pribula mentioned working as a wide receiver, which takes me back, John, when he told me in the preseason, and I asked him about his role, and he said, I don't know, maybe I'm a wide receiver. And I said, excuse me, I think, are we on to something? Like, did you slip up there? Were you supposed to say that? And he kind of blushed a little bit, backtracked, and was like, I mean, hypothetical. So yeah, I was doing some detective work there in early August about his role. But I just think it's going to be really interesting because it is new, because they're committed to it, to see kind of what that looks like. And he did touch on, I don't know if you caught this about the two helmets that he has. Did you catch
Yes.
that?
Yeah, he essentially can't wear the green dot when Drew's out there. So he is, and I think this is a good indication of how it's probably viewed. He's not a quarterback when Drew's out there, right? He is you call it a chess piece. I call it an offensive weapon. He is something else. He is a skill position player who is not necessarily a quarterback when he's out there because Drew is still getting the call from the sideline. And so I think that is interesting. That being said, he has a second helmet for when he goes in late in games, when they have the game in hand and he gets those snaps as the actual quarterback. But I think that is just a nice indication of how it's viewed. And I think that's the proper lens to view it through too, right? That this is not, yes, it's a 2 QB system, but really it's an athlete that is also a good passer that you utilize however you can to help your offense take the next step. Because I think they're going to need it, right? We looked at the schedule in the preseason and we were like, okay, like really it's Ohio State and Wisconsin for good defenses they'll have to face. Well, USC might have figured something out defensively against LSU. I think that is going to be interesting. They look like a completely different defense against a really good, or a projected to be at least, LSU got good offense. And I think it's, something that we're going to have to keep an eye on too, that maybe that USC game is a bit more of a threat moving forward. And I think someone like Pribula is going to help them kind of take advantage of a USC defense that is better, but still might not be to the level that they want it to be.
Yeah, and that's right. I mentioned this before on here of wouldn't this kind of be crazy if D'Anton Lynn, former Nittany Lion, now defensive coordinator at USC, if he's the guy who kind of complicates things for Penn State this season in their push to make the 12-team playoff. And after watching that game, that's going to be a big one, John. You and I are going to be out there in Southern California. Definitely not, hopefully, maybe sitting on a beach. Definitely not. But we'll look at the beaches at some point. But
Yes.
we will absolutely be thinking about how can this offense try to maybe exploit this defense, right? Can you take advantage of a young DC? Which it's going to be like, to me, that's the focus has kind of shifted for us, where it's like, I projected that was going to be a good game, a big game. Now it's like, ooh, this very well could be, 2 top 10 teams, which is going to be important. Flipping over to the defense here for a second, the cornerback rotation that we saw on Saturday. Be good if I remembered the days of the week. AJ Harris with 51 snaps. We spoke with AJ Harris this week, who said, yes, he was nervous before making his first start at Penn State. And it was Jaylen Reed, who was all over the place on Saturday, who said to him, hey, remember the summer when they took a training trip apparently to Houston, and remember the trip and all the work that we put in that kind of led to this moment? Like, you're prepared, you're ready. And we continue to see and hear about Jaylen Reed, the leader, right? Like, I think James Franklin mentioned, I believe it was early last week, or no, it was on his radio show last week, that they have these team captains, right? He goes, but there are other guys that could have been captains but aren't, and that those guys are stepping up too. So it was interesting to me. You kind of hear about that. Jalen Kimber, 45 snaps. And then as you kind of scroll down a little bit, Cam Miller, cornerback with 20 snaps, which I am curious this week what that distribution looks like between those top three corners. Because again, this is a developmental game. You know, Zion Tracy is somebody that I think we'll see more of this week. But yeah, this is kind of peeling back the curtain on the secondary a little bit.
When Reed came out too during the West Virginia game, it was Miller who filled in at the Lion too. I think that's notable.
Yes.
Like that, not all of those snaps were at outside corner, which is an important distinction. It's obviously a very different position, and that they're asking him to play in those scenarios. But yeah, I think I know James said not to look into the distributions necessarily. Just
too late. I already have.
But I do think like AJ Harris established himself as this team's best corner. I think AJ Harris is going to go in the first round of the 2026 NFL draft. I think I've said that before. Like, I think he is an elite corner, like the shutdown level corner.
No, wait, John. No, wait. If we backtrack this to about a week ago, if we run the tape, I believe when we were projecting starting cornerbacks, one of the two of us said AJ Harris and Jalen Kimber. That was me.
But listen, Jalen Kimber kind of came on late in the summer. It wasn't necessarily
defaulted. I defaulted
foreseeable.
To the older guy because that I think is kind of the James Franklin thing, right? Like,
but I also think
the older guy.
To Kimber's credit, well, also you have to keep in mind Kimber might be older, but Cam Miller's been in the program longer, and I think that also matters too to James.
Yeah. It's a balancing act.
I think to Kimber's credit, he was also really good on Saturday. He was just as fast as he had been credited for being when he was at Georgia and Florida. He, isn't as strong as AJ Harris is, and I will be curious to see how he deals with bigger physical receivers. But I thought he did really well too, and the program talks all the time. When I say the program, I mean James, every coach, every player, like everyone gives a lot of credit to Terry Smith, but like you're seeing why. He might be the best assistant coach on staff, the best position coach at the very least, with the longest track record of consistently getting guys to perform to their talent level and frequently above it. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. But yeah, this is, you hear they're 6 corners deep and it's like, okay, but it's probably like 2 or 3 and then maybe one more guy. No, this is at the very least 5 corners deep. And like, depending on how you think Zion Tracy is going to progress, it is a legitimate 6 corners deep. And I think that is commendable for Terry Smith and for this defense. It's going to be crucial because, maybe the pass rush doesn't always get home as often as you want it to because your best pass rushers are drawing so much attention, but you need those corners to lock guys down. I think they have the guys to do it.
Yeah, and I have a piece up on The Athletic titled 8 Things I Think I Know About Penn State After Week 1, where I tried to dig into some of the numbers and observations and that type of thing. But yeah, John, you're right. I mean, 6 cornerbacks played snaps. AJ Harris led the way with 51, Jalen Kimber 45, Cam Miller 20, Elliott Washington the second with 15, Audavian Collins 12, and Zion Tracy 3. Now, this also, maybe at some point this year, we're going to have a Audrey on Audavian or Odd on Odd kind of.
You keep trying to make this happen, and I refuse to let it happen.
Yeah, it's just, maybe we'll get there. We got to work on it a little bit.
Yes.
But I do think like the secondary, we've seen how good it is. We've seen the depth, but I go back to James Franklin's comment, his first press conference of the season this year in the summer when he mentioned Terry Smith and the cornerbacks, and he said, "This is the blueprint." Right? This is like the constant reloading, rebuilding. And I think too, John, this speaks to what they saw last year in the Peach Bowl, right? You had the opt-outs, you were shorthanded, you had younger guys who had to get thrown into the fire a bit. And I think they learned from that moment that, hey, we got to kind of build this up a little bit because I think there was some pause after that game of okay, we feel good about Cam Miller, but we're still really young here. So to go out into the transfer portal and do what they've done was really, really significant. But I am with you, and that AJ Harris, I think, is going to be phenomenal. I think when it's all said and done, we're talking about one of the best transfer additions of this portal era here for Penn State.
Especially when you consider they're going to get at least probably 2 years out of them.
Yeah, man, John, you're just projecting everybody's futures today. Who's going
I'm
to
not,
the draft?
To be clear, I'm not projecting anyone's futures. I'm just like, I feel like stating
You're
the
just
obvious
saying
with some
what
of
we
this
both are
stuff.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't. It's going to be a thing with Drew Allar, I'm sure, too, at the end of this year, right? Like, is he staying or is he going? Like, you'd be naive.
Where would he go, John?
Right. You'd be naive to think that like the draft isn't a very real possibility for Drew Allar after this year. And Singleton and Allen and Dani Dennis-Sutton, Abdul Carter, like all of the KJ Winston, like all of those guys, like, yeah, like that is kind of the point though, right? To get guys that talented into your program so they can leave early and still make it plenty of impact within that time. Again, I'm not reporting anything, but like this, it's the reality, right?
It's
There's
logic.
no need to be naive.
It's year 3 for the bulk of your significant playmakers, right? Like that's why so much was geared toward this year when you look at it with the push, the expanded playoff, all that. Another thing on the defense I wanted to gauge your opinion on. We talked about it a little bit Saturday night when we were loopy in West Virginia after a very long day. Abdul Carter, and we talked about it a little bit Saturday and how he didn't stuff the stat sheet. And then I saw there was even more fan panic than I had realized. Like when I kind of started seeing some things people were tweeting at me and wondering about it and this and that. I did write about it a little bit on The Athletic. I am not worried at all about it. Like, I don't think this is concerning, alarming. Like, to me, and James Franklin hit on it, John, right? It was hey, he does more than what shows up in the stat sheet. And I think TV doesn't obviously show you all of that, but we see it when we're there live.
But I do think the one thing, like I agree with him, like Abdul Carter's impact is never going to be measured by tackles for loss, sacks. I mean, at times it will be, but like it's not. There's always going to be more to it than that, right? Where I disagree with some of the assessment is that it doesn't matter, right? Like I think, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but I've seen other people say this, like. He still needs to be in the right positions. He still needs to kind of not be worn out. He still needs to not over pursue, right? Like there are times where
there's room for growth. Yeah.
Yes. But where flaws show up that were there last year too. Like that doesn't mean he's not going to be a top 10 pick in the draft. It doesn't mean he's not going to be the team's leader in sacks or have whatever. Like it doesn't mean any of that isn't true, but he is not a perfect pass rusher. There is still room for growth. And I think, those are the kind of things that you still need to see him work on throughout the year and see him improve at. And I don't doubt that he'll be much better at all of this by Minnesota, Maryland, whatever, like at the end of the year, because we know that he works hard. Like he's so singularly focused on this at like improving as a football player. Like I firmly believe he will be a significantly better player in 10 weeks than he is right now. That should be the case for a lot of guys, but I have a lot of faith that it'll be the case with him. I just like there is stuff I think that is cause for maybe pause, not necessarily concern.
Cause
but like,
for pause. Our
that's
next
the second
segment.
time I did that. I gotta stop doing that. I'm gonna start overthinking everything I say because I'm worried I'm gonna rhyme stuff. But I do think that you don't want to necessarily say like this is a catastrophe. Abdul Carter is not a good passer. No, like none of that's true. Like it's more about being measured with the expectations, understanding that he is still changing to a new position where it requires a different type of cardio too, right? Like you're using different muscles rushing the passer than you are dropping into coverage. I think he's going to be elite this year eventually. I don't think he was in game 1, but he obviously didn't have to be for this defense to be elite, and I think that's important too. But yeah, I guess I just disagree with the assessment that it was like all fine and dandy and that everything will be all right. I do think it will be, but I do think there's plenty to learn from in game 1 still for Abdul Carter.
Pause for pause.
Don't do this to me. Maybe we start an animal shelter since you hate dogs so much.
I do not. I am allergic to. I don't like cats, and we don't.
Yeah,
people
we've had
saw
this
how spirited I get about. I do not. I'm just allergic to dogs, so that's why. That's where my dislike comes from.
Dogs are the best. Eventually, my dog will make an appearance on this show. I'm certain of it, as he tends to
Yeah,
barge his way into things.
you should bring Reese on. We could have a weekly segment with
We
Reese
could.
too.
Listen,
And
I've taken him to places before, and people have had the chance to meet him in public, including one of our sponsors, Voodoo. Right, like that was
oh yeah,
Reese has been there before. He's a very good boy in those settings. He's just curious and sniffing and all that stuff. But yeah, we have somehow gone off the rails
Abdul
quickly.
Carter played 39 snaps. That's where I was going with
Yes,
this. But
right.
the one bringing us back on the tracks for once. Smith Vilbert is somebody I think this weekend that we're gonna want to keep an eye on. James Franklin was asked
Mhm.
about him this week, and again, the distance between the Outback Bowl and this week is significant. And you're talking about somebody who's missed a lot of football, who's waited a really, really long time. And I thought James Franklin was effusive with his praise of Smith Vilbert this week. And, I think it is easy to get lost in the shuffle of Abdul Carter and Dani Dennis-Sutton, and two players that are going to be really, really good and who are really, really good. But I just think the way James spoke about Smith Vilbert and how it's difficult to find someone with his build, his physique. Um, Perhaps there's more here that we're all going to start to see from Smith Vilbert. He's somebody that I'm for sure gonna keep a tight eye on Saturday because I think we'll see more of him. He played
Yep.
24 snaps against West Virginia, but I think this weekend is a really good opportunity for him and Amin Vanover as well to kind of really assert themselves. Like, we know these are defensive ends 3 and 4 on the field, but in terms of putting really good stuff on film, I think this is a good opportunity for both those guys.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. This is going to be the case at a lot of positions on Saturday, though. Like, I think we're going to have a chance to learn a lot about spots 3 and 4 on the depth chart at
Mhm.
almost every position. I think Penn State should be trying to get as many guys rotated in early. And I don't just mean like, oh, Penn State's blowing out Bowling Green, play him in the fourth quarter. I mean, like, you know, take Trey
Deep
Wallace out and
rotations. Yep.
yeah, in the first quarter, have some plays where Luke Reynolds is your only tight end, or where your receivers are Tyler Johnson and Mekhi Flower. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
give yourself a chance to see these guys in reps that matter more, where the game is still, I guess, hanging in the balance. Because frankly, Penn State's going to take care of business Saturday. I hate to spoil the game for anybody who is attending. So have a great time, but Penn State is going to win that game. They're going to win by a lot in all likelihood. So I think this is a good data point for players that we don't always see playing.
Mhm.
And you mentioned a defensive end with like Vanover. I think we know a little bit more about. Yes, he's
Right.
been dinged up in the past, but I think I'm pretty confident that he's a really good third defensive end. But with Vilbert, you're right. It's seeing how much the athleticism translates, how much the technique has been refined over the last, half decade of his career, like whatever it is now. Like it is important to see that take shape in a game. James
For
can
sure.
talk about how it's happening in practice and stuff, but until you see it on the field, it can leave people, maybe wanting more still. I think he's
Mhm.
going to show that on Saturday. And I think people are going to have a lot more faith that, if Dani and Abdul have to come off the field because, they're gassed and they just need to rotate in defensive ends, that the level of play will still remain high with both Amin and Smith out there.
I also Jordan Meyer is somebody else, the transfer from Wisconsin at defensive end that I'm intrigued by. And I think this is another one of those opportunities to see him. He played one snap this past week, but it's somebody that you think about, okay, what is this next wave, right? And how deep do they get with some of these younger guys, like we talked about earlier, with redshirt opportunities and playing them and trying to figure out, is it best to play a guy now, or do you want to maybe wait for a game later in the year where you might have an opportunity. So that's going to be interesting. But John, my burning question for Saturday, and the thing that I think is really important in the grand context of the season, is the field goal kicking situation, right?
Yes.
James Franklin said he has confidence in Sanders Sahaydak, who missed the 47-yarder that I also missed walking down to the press box or out of the press box Saturday, and you filled me in afterward that there was a field goal attempt. Um, if you're going to, and I'm not saying they are, but if you're going to open this kicking competition back up, this weekend's a great chance for it, right? There are only so many opportunities where you have a crowd in the stadium, you have pressure moments, even though it's Bowling Green. You gotta get a better feel for this with your operation, but also with your specialists. So for me, like if you're looking at okay, beyond the depth perspective, what can we take out of Saturday? It's the kicking situation. James Franklin was not pleased with it, and I think like his comments there, kind of in all phases of special teams, like there is room for growth, and that was clear Saturday too.
Yeah, I think the kicking competition is interesting because obviously you want to have a kicker you can rely upon in those
Hmm.
situations because inevitably it will arise. Also, a good way to avoid having to kick is just having a really good offense, right? And I think that might be
Right.
we see that maybe as a little bit more of the plan this year than it has been in past years because Andy Kotelnicki's gonna want to go for it.
Hmm.
We saw him put his foot on the gas pedal prior to halftime on Saturday. I think that's going to be the case a lot. I like coaches who are more aggressive in those situations, like try and score.
Hmm.
Field goals usually aren't going to give you the best chance to win games. You got to score touchdowns, and I like coaches who press the issue there. And I think Kotelnicki's going to do that a bunch this year. So hopefully for Penn State, if you are Penn State, I should say, you're hoping that the kicking competition maybe doesn't matter all that much. But Ohio State, USC, Wisconsin, it might the
It
playoff, it might,
matters.
yeah. And maybe not though, right? Like we've seen that you score enough
No,
touchdowns, you can take that out of it.
here's
But
the
I do
thing.
think they
There are
need.
big moments where you're gonna need to be able to feel confident in your kicker. 47, 46 yards.
See, this
Or
is
John, we're gonna be having some great conversations on here about fourth down. No, I do think there's something to your point about them wanting to be more aggressive and probably needing to be more aggressive, right?
yes.
Some of that's the fine margin. I think the other piece of that is the kicking situation. But still, you are going to need I'm going through it with my Packers right now, John. I'm already freaking out because they head
I
to
wouldn't
Brazil
know.
with a yeah, exactly. Right. See, this is they head to Brazil with a new kicker because they cannot find a kicker. And to me, it's you want to feel good about it and you can tell us you feel good, but I want to see it. And I want to see it in warmups and I want to see it in the game. And I'm just curious if we see on Saturday Penn State up big, if we see them maybe fourth and short, you take the field goal opportunity, right? Because I mean, sportsmanship aside, I think it's more important that you learn about your kicker in these situations.
See, I would want to have a kicker that I know has the distance for 55,
Hmm.
and one that I know can hit from 40 and in pretty automatically, right? Like I don't know that in college you're ever going to find many kickers you trust going out there for
Hmm.
45, 47, 49-yard field goals. I think, you mentioned the Packers and the NFL, like Jake Elliott, the Eagles kicker is
Hmm.
obviously very reliable, especially from deep, but like I think in the NFL you are going to find those high level kickers, right? They're just I can't think of many kickers in the last decade that I would want to send out with the game on the line from 45 yards out, right? Like, and I mean in
College
all of
kickers,
college
man.
football. Yeah, right. Like there's a reason like that gets said. Like I
Hmm.
would just so much rather lean on the offense and fourth and two, pretty much always go for it. And or not pretty much always go for it in opponent territory on fourth and two, right? Even fourth and four, fourth and five. I would rather trust my offense enough from those ranges when you're on the 28-yard line where it would be a 45-yard field goal, when you're on the 30, the 35, I would rather rely on my offense and anything other than like fourth and 20, basically, to go out and get that. And I think that is the way to mitigate this because try as they may, none of those three guys are suddenly going to become automatic from 45 plus if they're not already, right? Like it's a difficult thing to do. Alex Falcons, part of the appeal with Alex Falcons last year was that
Hmm.
he was automatic in the short yards, right? Like you trust where when you just needed points late, like when you can get within like 15, down to the 15 or closer potentially, like you could get them. I think outside of that, like I would rather just go with the aggression, go with going, you know what I mean, trying to score a touchdown, those scenarios. This is a philosophical thing for me in general, but especially in college football where your offenses are usually significantly better than your defenses, broadly speaking, and where your special teams guys, your kickers especially, are not up to the level where you would need them to be to make it worth it. I would rather, yes, it's a concern, and I agree with you that they need to find someone to step into that role. But I think there is a better way to do things than to put yourself in that situation in the first place, right? Where you're relying on anything from 45 plus.
Well, John, it's official. We're not going to get a sponsorship from Cole's Kicking Academy after this.
Yeah, listen, you're not going to find many more anti-kicking field goal people in
than you.
all of the media than me. Yeah,
wow.
Even punting. Like
I didn't know you were so anti. I did not know that.
Yeah, I am very much so. I'm more pro offense than anything else.
Yeah.
But if you are going to be an elite team, you're probably going to have an elite offense. And if you have an elite offense, you should probably be able to get 5 yards when you need it, right? Like you should have those plays in the playbook. And I think Penn State does. I think Penn State is. And I think Penn State probably doesn't have to worry all that much about its kicking game because of that this year.
Well, John.
That being said, when Penn State loses a game because they missed a field goal, I'm very sorry to everyone listening to this.
Yeah, when they lose to Ohio
totally
State by 3.
Yes.
We're gonna have some conversations.
Well, fortunately, I don't think the conversation is going to be about me if they lose to Ohio State by 3.
Oh, our producer's cutting this clip. It's becoming. I'm making it a thing.
That's fair. Let's take one more break from the podcast to discuss our friends at Voodoo. That's Voodoo Brewing Company, located at 201 Elmwood Street in State College, a place Audrey and I frequent. Both for good beer and both for a good time, right? Like it is a great place to hang out. Whether it's winter, you have the heated tables there to get you nice and cozy, and still have a chance to sit outside and enjoy a drink. They have great food there as well. This is, I know, one of my favorite places to go in State College.
Yeah, sit down, grab a beer, have good conversation, overlook the creek. I think this is one of the greatest spots in State College because you can just kind of sit back and relax. And John, I say this is kind of an adult spot around town. However, a lot of my friends with kids like taking them there because the kids like looking at the water, playing with the stream, getting a good bite to eat. So our friends at Voodoo Brewery, we're happy to have them back as a sponsor of the Nittany Dispatch again this year. Go on down, grab a beer, have yourself a good time, sit by the fire pits. The fire season is calling, and enjoy the conversation and grab yourself a beer at Voodoo Brewing.
That's Voodoo Brewing Company at 201 Elmwood Street in State College.
John, I will go first since I was correct last week with my player that we'll be talking about on Sunday.
You were kind of correct. Drew was the real answer, though.
No, I was totally correct, but we spruced up the category this week, and it's going to be the under-the-radar player that we'll be talking about on Sunday, right? So, like, quarterbacks totally off the table, which is what I said last week. Because it's,
not
if we're talking about, we're always going to talk about the quarterback after a game.
What if it's not Drew or Beau?
That's fair. We can get third string quarterbacks are allowed.
Yes.
But my under the radar player of the game on Saturday, I tipped it a little bit earlier. It's Cam Wallace. I want to look at the number 3 running back. I think we see him get the end zone. I think we see him get a lot of carries. I want to see what he looks like because, again, as you had mentioned earlier, and as it's on a lot of people's minds, what does this backfield look like next season? Right? Like, I think Saturday's a good chance. It looks young, right? So it's going to be a good opportunity for him, but I also think the guy's beyond him. So Cam Wallace is my under the radar player we'll be talking about on Sunday. Who do you have?
I like that call. And to be clear, this isn't necessarily the first guy we'll bring up like it was last week, just because, like you said, it's an under the radar type thing. Like this is someone that we will talk about in deep discussion on Sunday. I think that's Kaden Saunders. I think him getting snaps at receiver is going to be important if it ends up happening on Saturday. I tend to think it will. Again, not reporting anything, but tend to think it will. And if he does, I think he has a chance to establish himself as a legitimate threat from the slot, as a fourth guy that they really trust, that they can go 4 wide potentially if they need to. I think this is maybe not a breakout game, but I think he's going to finish the game with 4 or 5 catches, at least one big play, and I'll give him a touchdown in there too. But yeah, I think Saunders is the guy. I think really you can take your pick of a lot of these offensive weapons. I don't know if we're going to see Ethan Grunkemeyer at quarterback, but I thought about saying Grunkemeyer because this is going to be one of, I don't know, Audrey, maybe 2 chances to see him potentially in a game this year, right? Like it's this game and it's Kent State because, like I know the Penn State's a lot better than Illinois and probably will blow them out, but you're probably just leaving Pribula in because those reps are meaningful enough against Illinois that you want Beau to get them
for next season.
I think, I think at this point that the 2 MAC games are the only real chances for Grunkemeyer to play this year. Wouldn't be surprised if he did. Wouldn't be surprised if he didn't. But I do think there's a chance we see him take the field some. And I think that will be really interesting and fun to evaluate because he has got a very strong arm, and there is some, he obviously works out with the same trainer, Brad Mendler, as Drew Allar. And I think he is, got some of those same traits that Drew does. And I think that would be fascinating to watch.
Yeah. And that's obviously the Drew Allar conversation has shifted, John, in the off season to now of 1 week.
Who could have seen this coming, Audrey? Who last year who was, I'm going to say this and it's all going to come back to bite me again like it always does. But I said so many times on this podcast last year that I did not think Drew Allar was at fault for what was going on with the Penn State offense. And I said it all off season. And you can vouch for me on this. I watched the
Drew Allar apologist. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was called a lot of things. And like
what?
No need to say them here. You can go through the comment section and find them yourself. Yes. But you can vouch for me on this. I watched the All 22 film a lot this offseason. Like I spent too much time doing those types of things. And
when you weren't playing the video game.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you got to do something before it gets to mid-July. But I came back to the same conclusion over and over again, that I still thought all the talent was there with Drew Allar, that I did not have real cause for concern. Like I know he dropped on public draft boards and everything, but I did not have real cause for concern that he was not the same guy, or could not be the same guy, I guess, because he wasn't there yet. He still isn't there. But that he could not be the same guy that people thought he could be when he got to Penn State. And I think Saturday was the first step in that evolution. This coming Saturday is probably not going to be a step in that evolution because, frankly, he's not going to play enough for it to matter. Or my guess is he's not having to make as many high-risk throws, I should say. Like on Saturday, I talked about that throw from one hash mark to the other sideline. We talked about the back shoulder throw to Harrison Wallace. Like so much of what you want to see out of Drew Allar you saw on Saturday. And it's, I think you're right. I think it's all shifted. Like suddenly the conversation is where I think you and I both projected it would be at this point.
Suddenly there's no pause for cause in the Drew Allar.
All right. Well, I am going to wrap the podcast there. Actually, wait, no,
we didn't get a pick.
Yeah, we have to.
Should I go first?
Yeah, you can go first with this.
I've got Packers 27, Eagles 24.
That is, listen, I will say this. I think the Eagles win that game, and I do not think either defense covers itself in glory. I think
say that to Jeff Hafley's face, John.
I think Jeff Hafley was a bad hire. I think
you have not seen this defense, then, friend.
I think the Eagles win this game 35-31. Jeff Hafley, who notably did not put together many successful defenses at Boston College.
This is a good segue because I spent most of my week working on a story about Boston College that'll be out soon on The Athletic. Obviously, Bill O'Brien's there. Big win Monday night. I talked with Bill this summer about
weird how they
programs
had more success when Hafley left.
I'm not. There's no pause for cause or cause for pause, whatever.
Can't even get it right now.
Can't even get it right. But the Boston College story will be out on The Athletic. It is really interesting, and there are more. I'll say this: there are more ties, Penn State ties, to this BC program than I think meet the eye for Penn State fans. I outlined it in the story, but I had a chance this week to talk with Craig Fitzgerald, who was the strength coach under Bill O'Brien when he was at Penn State. Also, there was a GA, Will Lawing, who was here with Bill. He's a GA when he was here with O'Brien at Penn State, and he's been with him ever since. He's now the OC at Boston College. I talked with him this week, but it's a really good look at what Bill O'Brien is building and how some of the same or similar philosophies and tenets of, hey, I got to roll with my sleeves and go to work. This is what I have. I think we did a pretty good job capturing that in the story, so that's out there. But my pick for this weekend for the game that most of you are here for.
All of that just for Jeff Hafley to give up 30+ on a Friday night in Sao Paulo.
Do not say this, John. Penn State 48, Bowling Green 6. Penn State 48, Bowling Green 6. What do you got?
And for what it's worth, that is both, and I know people care about this, that is both covering the spread and hitting the over. I do not know if you knew that, but it is the case.
Sure, you tell me, yeah.
I have both scenarios also playing out. I have Penn State winning 52-7. I think this one's going to be over pretty quickly. I do not think Bowling Green's going to score on Penn State's first team defense. I think that touchdown's coming late in the game. And this is a rout from the beginning, and Penn State fans are never really concerned about it, which is why we didn't spend a lot of time talking about Bowling Green today. It's one of those games, and there will be more of them this year, and that's a very good thing for Penn State. But I think that's a good place to leave it for this week. As Audrey mentioned, you can find that Bill O'Brien story on The Athletic. You can find her on Twitter at OddSnyder4. You can find me on Twitter at John Sauber. You can find all of my writing at centerdaily.com. Had some stuff this week. My post-game story about Drew Allar and like kind of the step he's taking, and some good color about how this is business as usual, right? That win over West Virginia, which I think is very interesting. Still an Andy Kotelnicki story up there too. If as you learn more, you want to know more about Kotelnicki's background, you can find that there. Andy Kotelnicki, as I said. But that is where you can find us. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button down below. Hit the subscribe button down below. That really helps us out. We will be back at some point post-game after the Bowling Green game. Until then, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.